Thank you. So maybe to start off, how many of you, if you were at a social event and somebody came up to you and said, "What do you do?" what would come naturally out of your mouth, you'd say, I'm a salesperson. How many of you at that same social event, if forced to say that when somebody asked, "What do you do?" would feel somewhat uncomfortable saying, "I'm a salesperson"? Yeah, and that's typical for all of us. Why is that? Got to think about a little bit about that. How many of you do have some capacity in your job where you do have to sell? And does it cause conflict sometimes trying to figure out, how do I approach this task, this sales job I have, and rectify it with my morals and my values and where I'm coming from? Anybody struggle with that? So we're going to dive into that. The content that we're going to walk through today comes out of a program that I run called the Sales Performance Accelerator. It's sort of a long-term, think about it in terms of like a small Bible study group that gets together twice a month for a couple of hours, and it's part training, part coaching, and part accountability, where we get small groups together. We've got them in Denver, and we've got them in different places around the states, and we actually have a group started in Sydney. But it's a sales training group that uses sort of that small group format to teach people, and so we're pulling some content directly out of there. And actually the content that we're working with precedes our cold calling content with how do we get your mind in the right spot around this task? How do we go after it? Now I've added the scriptural inserts, but you know, a little bit of my background to help you understand where I'm coming from. I grew up in a very strong Christian family. My dad was from the Catholic faith, and we were raised in the Catholic faith. My mom was more the charismatic Christian, Pentecostal Christian faith, so I had a little of both sides in the house. And what that means is we had a lot of Bible, a lot of faith, a lot of prayer, and we had a lot of rules and a lot of guilt and all that kind of stuff all blended together. And when you grow up and you go into the work world, what that means is, boy, you're really evaluating everything around you for, is this the right thing to be doing? And should I be doing this or doing that? And how do I approach it? And so wrestling with that kind of thing, I went into college and became an engineer because that was really off the grid for all these moral questions, right? And realized probably a few years into being an engineer that I was a little more social than that, and ended up getting drawn into the sales profession. And really have spent, well, the last 25 years in sales, really the last 20 years, nearly 20 years in this company, wrestling with how do I rectify my values and my upbringing and my beliefs with sales, right? How do I make this all cohesive, one thing that I believe in across the board, and never feel, I thought it was a comment that the prior speaker said, feel a little funny about it inside, feel a little yucky about certain things, right? How do I avoid that? What's going on, and how do I take this all apart? So that's where we're going to come at this talk today from. One of the first things to get started is a distinction between conversation, attitude, and perspective, all right? So dialogue and conversation is quite literally the words that you're saying between you and the other person. And that's sort of a surface level of communication that I tell you something and you tell me something, and there's a dialogue or conversation there, right? Comment made earlier about Zig Ziglar has 100 great closing lines. That's at the dialogue level. But underlying that dialogue level, one layer deeper, is what we'll call our attitude. Now, if we had a full format workshop, we would talk about attitude as the physical manifestation of all the things you're contemplating in your head, right? So as I'm sitting in front of another person and I'm thinking to myself, oh, I should tell them this, and their current way of doing things isn't as good as the way I could bring to their company, and all those things, all those thoughts manifest physically in our tone of voice and in our body language, and they're interpreted by the other person as our attitude. You guys follow me so far? The layer where things get really fun and interesting is this lower layer. I call it perspective or mindset or position. You might also add some other words in there that we're a little more familiar with. We could call it faith. We could call it belief. What it is it's the aggregate of all of those experiences, beliefs, things we carried along from our faith, scriptures, things that have guided us and form the concrete center of our being. And at this level, it changes our brain function so that depending on that foundation, it causes us to contemplate certain things in our head, right? that when a situation arises, that yucky feeling originates with a faith or an ideal or a belief at your core that then judges a situation and says, boy, I'm not really sure about this situation, and you think about it, and that manifests with a discomfort or an uneasiness about the situation, and then that manifests in how you choose to dialogue and converse with the person across from you, right? You guys following me so far? So it's at this level of perspective or mindset or faith or belief where the conflicts arise, right? Am I doing things consistent with the way I feel the world should be, the way I feel things should be, the way I believe? And it's at this level that we're going to work today around biblical selling, because this is where we're going to find conflicts in our own approach and our own thinking. How many of you get that uneasy feeling sometimes when you put into a situation and you need to sell? So that's where we're going to head on today. What's going on? Where do I drive my mindset? To help us out a little bit, we're going to do a little simulation. This is going to require some interaction between us. So let's pretend that you need to sell. I'm going to put you in a situation where you have to be a salesperson, but the product that you're going to sell is a pill that unequivocally cures cancer. That if the person takes the pill, the cancer's gone. But you have to sell it. You can't give it away. And it costs money. And let's pretend for the moment that you find yourself in a waiting room, a lobby somewhere, and it's just you and it's one other person, and for some reason, maybe it's a physical attribute, maybe it's a conversation you overheard on the phone or whatever, for some reason you know that person needs this pill. How do you approach this situation? Just blurt things out. We don't need to raise hands. How do you approach this sale? What's your first step? What's your first objective? You, the other person, they have a problem, you have a solution. What's your first? And don't think in terms of, I know how selling's supposed to go. That's not the test. Think in terms of, I know how human beings operate. I know my job in this situation. What do you do? Go ahead. Rapport. So what does that mean, though? What do you physically actually do? Exactly. First thing that we would do, anybody else have a different perspective, or do we agree? First thing we do is we just engage in a conversation, right? A conversation about what? Anything except for what? Anything except for cancer or the pill, right? We're going to engage in a conversation. Step one, we all know this naturally. We're human beings. The first thing we do is engage a conversation. And the sub-step is about anything except cancer or this pill, right? I'm just going to put a ... speed things up. Okay, so let's say you're successful. Let's say you get a nice, congenial, proper conversation going and you hit it off with this person. What's the next thing you need to do? Towards? Well, hold on. We don't have a problem that we're talking about yet, so we can't steer towards the pill just yet. So where do we go with, we need to steer the conversation, but where do we steer it? We need to have somehow or other, the fact that they're struggling with this issue has to come up, about, right, where the problem is. So we have to steer the conversation not towards the solution, but towards the problem. Somehow, we want the fact that they're struggling with this issue to become part of the conversation. Does that make sense? Steer towards, really, towards cancer. Let's say it comes up. Somehow or other they say, I'm battling this disease and it's really, been tough. What do we do right then? Empathize. We get them to talk about it more. Do we talk about the pill yet? No, we slow down. We say, talk, empathize about, forgive my spelling it this time of the morning, cancer, right? And my sloppiness, things shaking, too early to write. Let's say you succeed. They tell you all about it, tell you what they're doing, tell you the seriousness of it, and it is grave and it is serious for them. What do you have to do now? Have you heard? introduce the possibility of this remedy, right? I see nods. Anybody disagree with that idea? Step 4, introduce the remedy. You know. I'm Peter, so it might fall off again, but I don't know. Would you go into detail and start selling this thing with the research and the proving, or would you just sort of introduce it? Probably just say, and let's pretend as you introduce it, they're afraid you're going to launch into a sales pitch, and they react as if you just turned into an Amway salesperson. Everybody know what I'm talking about there? So their reaction is Amway. Let's just pretend their reaction is Amway. At the moment, you try as delicately and as carefully as you can to introduce this. It's a very negative, I don't want to be sold something reaction. What do? So do you stay in the conversation or do you just walk away? Stay in the conversation. Where would you go in the conversation? Go back, and if they're still uncomfortable, where would you go then? Go back. Does that make sense? Naturally, as human beings, our instinct in this situation is to back up, go back to rapport, right? Go back to general conversation, go back to things that are easier to talk about, and then reapproach the issue. Now, in this situation, and the situation is grave for them, and you have the remedy, how many times would you persist? As many as it took. Would you go away? You wouldn't go away. Why not? Because you can help them. This is the essence. Persistence and proper selling are both set up by where you're coming from. When we do this simulation, and it doesn't matter who the audience is, and I guided this in the context of trying to keep us on track for time, but it doesn't matter who the audience is, selling is a natural human interaction if your intent is to help the other person achieve something purely for them, that there's no self-interest. Does that make sense? Let's consider the process you guys put together. Engage rapport. Have a conversation about anything except for the thing you're selling or the problem that they might have. Somehow get the problem to come to the surface. And when the problem comes to the surface, we don't jump on it. We listen to it. We talk about it. We empathize. We really get intimate in understanding the problem. At some point, it becomes our job to bring up the fact that we have a remedy. But if they push you back and say, I don't want to be sold something, we don't walk away. We loop back to rapport. We loop back to building the relationship. We loop all the way through that loop again, back to the problem. If they push you back again, you persist. Persistence is purely a function of the amount of altruism in the interaction. Does that make sense? Persistence is a function of how much you're trying to truly help them. And the depth of your intent to help them achieve a goal that they need, not that you need, drives your persistence. We never back away from a sale when we really, so very quick story, sometimes I choke up on this one. Gentleman had an engineering business a number of years ago. Our children were in wrestling camp. They were little. They were probably 5, 6 years old. And every practice had to lay off another employee, had to do this, had to do that. And coming from an engineering background, providing sales training, I kept saying, come to the class, come do this. I wasn't forceful enough. And at the end of this period of probably a year and a half, he finally closed his business down. He shut it down. And I had to feel responsible for that because I didn't persist. And it was about that time that we wrote a lot of this curriculum, interviewing salespeople and trying to understand what makes you pound the phones and persist as such. And no matter where they came from, I talked to one of the top financial guys in town, a guy named Scott Theo. Anybody know Theo with Northwestern Mutual Life? So talk to him, talk to all these very successful salespeople, and to a person, they saw their purpose as altruistic, and that's what caused them to pound the phones and persist, right? The other part is how natural selling becomes if you remove the noise. So let's look at some of that. So we wrote a lot of this material about 6-7 years ago, and when the economy was really down, it was around 2008, 2010, and a lot of our clients were struggling with how do I generate business? And the bottom line was we were going to have to help them get past the idea that, the economy was bad, and also past the idea that, when somebody said no, you had to back away. And the only way to figure this out was to go to the source and figure out what makes people persistent. And the beauty of this is it all really segues with this idea of biblical selling. I came across a book, I would not call this is much more of a new age book called Power versus Force, and the author laid out what he called a continuum of human consciousness. The idea here is that human beings live their lives around a core emotion. And at the bottom of the spectrum, you have people who are in institutions, they're homeless, that's the core emotion, the shame, the guilt, the hopelessness, the grief is what's driving their behavior and their action. And at the top, you have, Jesus Christ, and somewhere just below him, a lot of the apostles and then the modern day saints, right? Mother Teresa's probably high on this. And then you have this spectrum, and somewhere around the middle, there's an inflection point where you go from self-focused in your core emotion to others-focused, right? And we're all aspiring, I saw this parallel that as Christians, we're all aspiring to move our way up that spectrum to become much more like Christ. The other thing I saw, though, that was really interesting in this is a parallel with sales. That people sell from a different core place. There's a different intention or different place that we're coming from to sell. At the bottom of the spectrum, we call it selling from pity. What does that look like? Everybody's driven by the busy street corners and seen the cardboard signs, right? That's sales, but we're selling out of pity. Pity me, give me money. The next level up is selling out of ego. What's selling out of ego look like? I'm the best. My product's better than everybody else. You should come with, and then in the old days, a lot of the big blue IBM, you got to go with the strong, blah, blah, blah. What's selling out of logic look like? Think progressive insurance. We're going to give you everybody's quote. Make a logical decision, right? Sometimes we're the best, sometimes we're not. It's reason. What does selling out of passion look like? But the language, your product is right. The language there suggests a little bit of ego. Hold on, we'll get there. Your product is helping the other person. It's the cancer pill. But how do we get there with our products? Because unfortunately, we don't have anything like that to sell. How many of you agree selling that cancer pill might be easier? Yeah, but we got to get there with our own products. So we're going to figure that out here in a moment. Passion is when you are selling from a core emotion of love or better, and the reason you're selling this thing is because it's going to help the other person, right? You're not selling it for personal gain. You're selling it because of what it can do for the world. There's an interesting book. How many of you read the book, The Greatest Salesman in the World by Og Mandino? There's a passage in this book that it was interesting the first time I read it, but when I came across this other book and got this idea of where you're selling from, it made sense. He says, I'll greet this day with love in my heart, for this is the greatest secret of success in all ventures. I will make love my greatest weapon, and none on whom I call can defend against its force. When you're trying to sell that cancer pill to somebody who has cancer and needs it, and you're doing it from a position or a mindset of love, their rejection of you does not even register with you. Does that make sense? That you are doing this for good, and you know it, and you believe it, and therefore you can't be pushed back, and your persistence will go on, right? This quote made a whole lot more sense to me over time. That the essence of making your product something you can sell from a position of passion lies in, so if you lay out a typical sales process, we grossly generalize it, but sales process, early conversations, discovery is where we learn about the other person's situation, issue, empathize, right? Solution is where we present the product, proposal, negotiate, close. Everybody kind of familiar with the process that looks somewhat like this? This little piece called discovery, that's where we have the conversation with our prospect about what their problem is and what it means to them to fix it. Execution of this step effectively fuels our passion, because at the moment we connect a real problem that our prospect has with a real faith that we can fix that problem for them, we become passionate. We no longer sell for our quota or our personal interests. We sell because we're trying to help another person. We sell out of a position of service. Does that make sense? The problem is, mostly in selling, we'll find that we shortcut this step, that somebody says, I have this problem, and we'll take it at face value, and we'll jump right to the features, the benefits, the how, the data. Yes? Question?
One of the main important aspects is that the customer defines his own weaknesses and why he's in the situation that he's in. Not you telling them, but them saying it themselves.
Absolutely. The customer defines the issues. Wow, how did I do that? And we need to drive part of this conversation to break through their surface level description of their situation and grow empathetic enough and curious enough to stay in this conversation until we get it. At the moment I understand my customer's plight and I believe I can help them, I move from ego or logic to passion in my sales process. Make sense? And so we can't take the customer's definition of how it's supposed to go and let it be. We have to understand how we're helping them in order to move up that spectrum. A couple of scriptures that, as I was going through this, I've been wrestling with sales and Christianity since I've been in sales, for 20, 25 years, right? And part of it is, the scriptures tell us, coming from my Catholic upbringing, they tell us what we're supposed to do and how to feel guilty if you don't do it, right? But I think the thing I came to realize later in life is the scriptures are really pointing you towards true north. They're not telling you what to do so much. They're showing you where success lies. And that when you get in alignment with them, things go a whole lot easier and we don't feel quite so uncomfortable. That when we are doing things out of service, selling becomes easy. It becomes natural, right? Another idea. Our belief in something is persuasion without us saying anything about it. How many of you have noticed with your Christian faith that when you're around your neighbors, when you're around your friends that may not be quite as strong in their faith as you, that there creates this divide between you where you're influencing one another? They're trying to bring you down a little bit and you're steadfast in your faith and you feel that pressure without saying anything. You could try your hardest not to exude that pressure, but just your belief, just your faith creates a pressure on the other person. You guys notice this? And so the way I like to liken this to like gravity, that if you have a really strong faith, it's like having a big gravitational field. And anybody in that field gets drawn towards your belief system. There's a pressure for them to think like you or to consider what you're doing and what's giving you that place in your heart that's so strong, that joy, right? And if their faith in whatever they're doing is lesser, over time, that force brings them closer and closer to you, to that same point of view. Human beings do not coexist with different point of views very gracefully. Does that make sense? That we must align ourselves around common points of view, and when we differ, there's pressure between us. Understand that I don't need to tell a person what they should do. All I need to do is believe that they should do it, and that creates pressure on them. You guys notice this? It's interesting in this format because I don't often talk to Christian groups, and this is where the thought originated for me, so I can't usually use that analogy, but it is so strong that we know it, that when our faith is strong and we're amongst a group of others, we're putting pressure on them even if we don't try to. You guys notice this, right? The same thing goes for when you believe you're going to help another person. If you know in your heart, and there's no faking this, there's no surface level manifestation of this, you have to really truly believe in your heart, I'm here to help this other person. That's a similar influence that you exert on them. That when they're thinking, you're thinking, boy, you really should take the cancer pill, and they're thinking, no, I'll stick with my current program. But when their faith is less than yours on that idea, you influence them the same way. You can't help yourself. When you're thinking our product or service could really help you out, and they're thinking, no, you just want my money, if your faith is centered in this idea of helping them out and not the money, you will draw them to your point of view. But once in a while, this idea that you just want my money gives them, and they're pretty certain about it, and you're not real certain that you're helping them. What happens is you get drawn into that point of view, you feel a little yucky inside, and you back off. That's where persistence stops in the selling process, right? This scripture came to mind to me, and this was not one of the ones, this a couple days ago, I said, I got to throw the faith of the mustard seed scripture on there. Because to me, it speaks to what do we have faith in? We often speak about faith in a fairly abstract way in our Christian beliefs. But in this situation, what I think we're talking about is faith in the fact that you're aligned with your values, you're aligned with your Christian morals. Faith in the fact that you're doing something for the other person's benefit, not for your own financial gain. That if you have very strong belief, very strong faith that that's what's going on, you can move mountains in a selling context. Right? But it's caused by that alignment with your faith, that you're doing the right thing. One of the problems that arises in selling is that we want the money too, yes? We got to run our businesses. And so, think about this, that if, it's the lilies of the field and the birds. If I'm focused on using the gifts I was given for the embetterment of the people I serve, the rest of that is going to work itself out. The moment my mind goes over to the revenue and the sale and the almost competitive nature of that negotiation, that's when sales dysfunction starts to occur. And what's funny about this is it doesn't matter whether you're Christian or not. Even people with no faith at all, what I teach them is if you focus on helping the other person, you're going to have more power in the sales process to get it done. The moment your mind goes to money, you do dysfunctional things. You do things that basically thwart the process of getting the sale closed. Don't worry about the money. Worry about your job, your role, your service. What it is you're meant to be doing, the money will come. And you have to purge it from your mind in order to get there. What it also means is we have to be responsible with respect to who we pursue to sell. And this is a little bit of a stretch for a scripture in this, but it's certainly one of the ones that's in my head as I'm trying to find true north and stay on that path. I have to sow my seeds places where they're needed. Can't be throwing them on rocks. I might get a short-term sale, but I'm always going to feel a little off. I see a nod there. You guys feel the same way sometimes? If I try to sell something that I don't have 100% conviction that I'm helping the other person, it's not going to be a good long-term sale. I'm going to feel not so great about it. They're going to feel not so great about it. It doesn't work. I've got to hunt out those places where I provide a service, right? But if I'm good about those things, one last key point, and then we'll open this up to discussion. If I truly am operating my business as a service to the community that I serve, then, and I'm doing a good job in helping other people, then it's not so much a matter of running my business for my gain, but rather of taking the gift that I was given responsibly and growing it. That growing your business and selling effectively in this manner becomes your responsibility. Much like the parable of the talents. I think we all feel blessed for the businesses we have and the incomes that we get from that and the ability that gives us to come back to the community and participate in our ministries and such, right? It becomes our responsibility. And I think this is one of the things I struggled most with from a Catholic upbringing is the Catholic Church preaches a lot of selflessness, a lot of vows of poverty, vows of self-diminishment, right? And so you get into business, you start realizing some success, and you end up with a pretty significant me conflict. Where one side of your head is saying, you should not be conspicuous, and the other side of your head is saying, push forward. And where that got rectified for me was with this parable of the talents. You've been given gifts. All of you have been given gifts. It's your responsibility to grow your business and serve the world. And this parable of the talents speaks so directly to that if you're doing this the right way and you're doing it for the good of other folks, you must go out and sell passionately and help the people that you've been blessed with the abilities to help, right? So with that, I want to just open this up for discussion. A lot of ideas just thrown out rapid fire. How are we on time? Yeah, 30 minutes elapsed? Good. That was right where we wanted to be. So thoughts, questions, ideas, connections that you guys can make to this. Anybody have these experiences where you've oversold? Yes.
I walked in a little bit late, so excuse me, but the other thing I would say, not just in how you run your business and how you relate with people and how you do your sales, but also if you're part of associations or chambers of commerce and things like that, I think it's really important to understand you have a responsibility in that as well. Brian and I were in the Cherry Creek Chamber Leads group together, and at one point I had some situations come up and I didn't handle them very well. And I look back on that with regret because I think my witness was corrupted a little bit because of how I handled that. So I would just ask you guys to prayerfully consider that when you're actually not just in your business itself, but also in your relationships with other business people. Because a lot of times they might be the only Jesus, you might be the only Jesus they ever see. So
That's a really good point. That for me, this has become somewhat of a ministry. Most of the people I work with don't have a strong Christian faith. I mean, they're in sales, right? But teaching them how to do this and having them realize success through this, and the same for your businesses, teaching them how to run a business aligned with Christian values and showing how successful that can be, changes the behaviors, which then orient people to look for the reasons behind that, why this works, right? It creates the hunger. Other ideas, other thoughts, yes.
So I have found that this is really important way to treat your employees also. Because if you do and you give and you love on your employees, then in my mind, the only way it's going to go is down. In my business, I don't see my customers. My employees see my customers. So if I treat them in this manner and give to them with the highest, with passion, and do what's best for them, they in turn will take that and go treat my customers the same way. At least I hope so.
Excellent point. And another point, and I'd meant to bring it up, and you just reminded me. How do we get our employees to sell from a position of passion? What you need to do as a business leader is to orient them towards how you help other people and how important that is to you, right? And when they realize that's the goal and that's important, they will naturally behave in a way that aligns with strong values and strong Christian beliefs. Ideas, thoughts, comments? Is it just early? Yes.
In my business, I get a lot of people coming in that I found waste my time, so I've been gently just firing them. I don't know if you guys have ever dealt with that, but they're trying to get more information. I give them more information, and then they go somewhere else with somebody else. And so I don't do that anymore. I hold my cards closer, and I just say, look, this isn't going to work for you. You need to stay where you're at. Bye. I'm sorry, but it's not going to work. So sometimes you actually have to do that. You just have to get rid of people that are time wasters.
Yeah, it's funny. We do, in this program, we do a talk at the very beginning of the program that addresses that exact thing, that people come, they'll take information, and there never was an intent to buy anything. And yeah, there's ways with integrity. You can fire them, let them go, have a strong communication. There's also ways you can make them become evangelists for you as you let them go by being crystal clear about this is who we help and this is who we don't, and this is why I don't think that this is a good pursuit for you.
I've been in sales for a long time, and what finally came to my attention is I might have thought that I have a really top-flight, wonderful product. I've done all my research. This is the best. But it took me a number of years to put that this is the best product with what the need was from the person. Once I finally accomplished that, my sales were much better.
Speak to that a little, because that's the essence of what we're talking about. Share how that shifted your mindset.
Well, I grew up in the life insurance industry with Northwestern Mutual. And they have a wonderful sales program about how to sell. And I bought into it. And I bought into the best product. But I didn't get to the understanding the client's needs until I really sat down and through discovery found out that I might have the best product, but at this point it might not be what they need. So you go a little further into the discovery and find out that they have another need. Well, through the years, I picked up quite a bag of product that worked for them in that situation, but I went in an entirely different way.
So doing the work behind, the research behind this, it was some very interesting things that came up. I mean, Scott, is it Theobald? Theodore, Scott Theodore? Had a conversation with him, nice half-hour conversation, and for him, selling life insurance is an accumulation of stories of families who didn't have life insurance and suffered tragic, devastating results after somebody died, right? And for him, it really, when you get him down to his core, it's altruistic. Talked to a guy that sold cars on the car lot and was very effective at it. And a guy I respected, and I said, you know, for you, selling a car on the car lot, how does that become altruistic? And he said, you know, he told me his process. He goes, somebody comes on the lot, I go for a walk with them. We talk, we walk around, and I watch their face. And the moment their face lights up, I try to figure out what their face lit up about. Is it a certain car? Is it a color? Is it a radio? What is it? And in my mind, selling that car to them that excites them is like giving, you know, toys or candy to a child. He said it just becomes my passion to help them get into that car. So then we begin evaluating, are you really excited about this car? And if they are, it becomes my job to figure out the financing, how do they sell their old car. But to him, he felt good every time he sold a car because that's where he came from, right? And that's, to Ed's point, it's amazing what a root of success that is. That when you're coming from there, it is the root of what causes you to be successful. Thoughts, questions? We're right there, about probably right at our 10 minutes. So thank you guys very much.